Thank you for joining us, everybody. My name is Ken. I've got Brian with me. Today's episode of Clicks and Bricks is all about open source software.
What is it?
What is open source software?
All right, let's start at the very beginning. Before we dive too deep into that, though, we got to start with our Between the Cubicles.
Yes.
And for our new listeners, one of our coworkers here, Abby, she's the one that thought about this because Ken and I have had some really awesome conversations between the cubicles.
Yes.
I think that's the best word for that.
Yes.
I want to talk about you today. And
Okay.
Let's talk about...
I'm ready. I'm prepared.
I want to talk about King shutting down New York.
So this last week, I shut down New York City, or at least a significant part of New York City. And I'll just jump right in and tell the whole story. So I flew to Boston on Thursday of last week. I flew out to Boston. I drove up to New Hampshire with a friend of mine. I bought some equipment, rented a big U-Haul truck, and I had to drive that U-Haul truck all the way back to St. Louis, which is quite a bit of a drive in not quite blizzard conditions, but it was snowing for a vast majority of the time.
You didn't think about the snow.
Didn't know about the snow. Actually, nobody knew about the snow. It kind of came last minute. So
it's a 24-foot truck, right? This is a
big U-Haul truck.
One you can get.
Yeah, the biggest one that I can get without a different kind of driver's license.
Oh, without a CDL.
Yeah, without a CDL. So I've got the truck. I've got it all loaded. Everything's going great, and I'm going to stop by my buddy Ron's house in Philadelphia because on an 18-hour drive, a 1-hour detour to see your college roommate isn't that big of a deal. So I shoot down to see my buddy Ron. I'm shooting and I'm coming, so I got to drive right through the middle of New York City, and I'm in a box truck and I'm cruising along, and the traffic is bumper to bumper, but it's running at 80 miles an hour, and we're just cruising along.
That's fast for bumper to bumper, man.
And so what everybody needs to know that if you're in a truck, you cannot be on a parkway in New York City. Like it's illegal, and two, the truck doesn't fit. So I'm cruising about 80 miles an hour, and I see the sign that says no trucks allowed on the street, finally, I guess. They probably warned me 20 times before I saw it. And I tried to get over, but I couldn't get over in time. I saw my exit pass, and then I see the bridge in front of me. I know my truck's 11 feet tall, and the sign says, the bridge is 10 foot 11 inches. So I jam on the brakes. I get stopped in time. I don't hit the bridge.
That's good.
But I'm in a position where I'm blocking both lanes of traffic on George Washington Parkway in downtown New York at 5 o'clock on a Friday night. So literally, people are spitting at me and honking, and I'm trying to back up. I'm trying to and I can't get anywhere. So I had to call 911. It was horrible.
Help me, please.
I called 911. He's like, did you hit the bridge? I was like, no. And he goes, you can't be on a truck on that parkway. And I'm like, I didn't know that until now. But yes, obviously I know now. And then I hear on the radio some idiot's blocking George Washington Parkway in a box truck because he can't fit under the bridge. So it was just a total debacle. It took an hour and a half for the truckers to get there to block the traffic back at the exit so I could turn around and drive back to the exit and get off the highway.
That probably took you like 8 turns to even turn that big truck around.
Yeah, because it was it's a 2-lane road with guardrails on either side. I couldn't even clear both lanes of traffic. I was only able to clear one lane of traffic, and it's dark out. And people are flying and cussing and throwing stuff at me. Yeah, it was.
I don't think I've made anyone mad enough to be spitting angry.
Yeah, it was bad. Like I was nervous. I was scared. I had every negative emotion you can have for that hour and a half. I had it, and it was just horrible.
You were sitting up, literally.
Yeah, I couldn't do anything. I was totally helpless. The police officers were super nice on the phone. They never showed up to the scene. Just the big record truck showed up to help me out.
How they find you too, though? That was an ordeal too. Like how they found your location.
So how they found me is crazy technology, right? So I call 911. As soon as you call 911 from your cell phone, a little thing pops up that says your carrier is detecting your location. And so I call 911. It's dark out. I can't see really anything because it's a big truck and I can't see really well anyway. And I'm like, the officer's like, hey, where are you at? I'm like, I don't know. My map says George Washington Parkway, but I don't know what street I'm at or cross street I'm at or
anything like that.
And he's like, hold on a second. And he flips through. I guess what he's doing is flipping through some cameras. He's like, okay, you're in that U-Haul truck. I can see you now. We're on our way. So New York City New York State, actually. I was in New York City, but I was on a parkway, so it went to the state patrol. It wasn't local police because about an hour into the whole debacle and I hadn't seen a record yet, I called the local police station and said, hey, I've already called 911.
Still need help.
Still need help, but I don't want to, like, it's not, nobody's getting shot or murdered or anything, so I didn't think it was like...
Well, not yet.
It was, I might have been. I'm sure people wanted to shoot me for sure, because they're like, I'm keeping them from getting home to dinner.
Right.
I have to imagine
on
that
a Friday night, dude?
I have to imagine that happens a lot. So what I noticed is Google doesn't have a height at all in their map. So
Google.
By the time I even got off the road, I'm trying to find a new route, and Google keeps bringing me back to the parkways. I cannot find another route. So
Gotcha.
I'm not affiliated at all with Trucker Path, but I called my brother, and I'm like, hey, how do you get a big truck through New York City? And he's like, oh, yeah, that sucks. So he's like, use this app called Trucker Path. And Trucker Path, it doesn't know the height of all the bridges, but it knows all the bridges that are below 13 feet. So you just say, hey, how tall is your truck? What bridges do you want to avoid? It's like 13 feet or lower, avoid those. And it will give you another path. So
that's cool.
If you're looking for, no, it's $35 a month. I think if you're looking for a business, you could go and measure every bridge in the country and sell that data to Google. And I think Google would buy it because they have, Google's got, the time that's going to take me there, if I get there in a bus, a car, a bicycle, or if I'm walking, right? They have all those things, but they don't have how tall my vehicle is. So all these guys that drive RVs, pull trailers and stuff like that.
They need to know that kind of stuff.
And,
or even if you're moving.
I grew up in the Midwest. I spent a lot of time on the West Coast when I was a kid and even as an adult. And I don't spend a whole lot of time on the East Coast. And
me neither.
The East Coast is, the oldest part of our country. So these bridges are made for, for cattle and carriages and stuff, right? They weren't made for big trucks. And yeah, so that was a very big learning experience for me. It was a lot of fun. I learned some patience and some humility. I learned all kinds of things about myself at 5 o'clock on a Friday, shutting down a major highway or parkway in New York City. So that was fun. Man. I hope to never do that again. I hope it's the only time I ever do it.
It wasn't fun enough to do it a second time.
No, I never want to experience that again. So,
man, thank you for being a good sport here and even just sharing that. I can see a lot of people being really concerned about talking about how bad of a situation they were in, but you being humble about it, man. Like that's awesome.
I mean, the entire everybody. I mean, other than the people that were really, really mad, the police officers were super nice and understanding. The wreckers totally understood it. So I think this happens in New York and the East Coast probably quite often. But
I'd be curious to know how often that actually happens.
I don't know. If you go to YouTube, because I did a little YouTube researching afterwards, and trucks getting stuck under bridges is pretty funny to watch. So if you're looking for a couple hours to kill on a at 3 o'clock in the morning on Friday, that's not a bad topic to look up. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're glad you made it back here safe and sound.
I made it home safe. That's all that matters. Had a couple little mishaps on the way.
You got some amazing stories. Sounds like you had an adventure.
Had a great adventure. Got to see my, one of my best friends from growing up. So
that's awesome, man.
Yeah. And I got some great merchandise for some really great prices. So
can't beat that with a stick.
No, not at all.
So let's keep this train moving.
Yes.
Keep it moving. Or box truck moving. I don't know. Whichever way you want to go with this. All right. So first question here today. Well, our topic, right? Let's first talk about our topic. Our topic is open source software.
Right.
Before we get into the questions, because this was a struggle for me too, so I got a feeling I'm not alone.
Probably not.
So I want to talk about first open source software versus closed source software. What are the differences? What are they?
Right. So I think first I would like to just set the precedence of what I am and what I know about open source software and open source technologies is I am a heavy open source user. I use a lot. An administrator. I use and administrate a lot of open source technology. Mm-hmm. I am not a licensing expert by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm not an open source expert. I wouldn't consider myself one. But I do know a lot about a lot of different open source software packages. I think I'm a utility player in the open source software world, and I know a lot of different software packages that can deploy solutions for people's needs or solve solutions for people's needs. So that's my experience with open source software. With that being said, since I'm in it, I do know a little bit about the licensing, and we're also Microsoft partners. So I did set up it's called for Microsoft SPLA, and that's the Service Provider Licensing Agreement. But for open source, most open source software is licensed under the GPL. And there's what's another? Yeah. So there's a few different versions.
That's Ron out back there talking.
Yeah. Of the general something licensing. And I'm not sure what that means, but basically, if it's under the GPL, that means it's open source. That means that there's a version of the software that is available for free use. Okay. So you can use that software at no charge. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different open source software packages on the planet today.
So that's the core value of what an open source software is that it's free.
Well, I don't know if the core value is free, and I think it's gonna change quite a bit depending on your needs. So, some people the core value is that it's free. For some people, the core value is that it's modifiable, right? That you can make changes to it and change it so you're really in control.
I spoke incorrectly.
Yeah.
One of the core
values is that it's free. And then it's wildly powerful, right? There's a lot of really powerful software packages out there that are open source. One of the benefits that I like about open source is that it's community based. So you're not necessarily waiting for a company to make a decision that something's broke and I'm going to fix it, or I need this feature, I'm going to fix it. You can literally write the feature yourself and submit it back to the group and start using it.
That's pretty cool.
But most of the time what happens is that on wildly popular software packages, the community is so big and so many people are using it and contributing that you can find modules and plugins and things like that pretty readily available to just put right in and solve the problem that you currently have. Whereas if you have a closed source software and you have a problem with it, like you want it to do something that it doesn't do, you either have to submit it to the manufacturer and hope that they do it, or just wait for them to do it, right? Or just do without it, or find some other solution for your problem.
Okay, so if we had to start off with a definition
of open source software
and closed source, like where would be Ken's definition? Not expert. Make sure you record. You remember that time frame when Ken said he wasn't an expert? We're going to bring that up later. We may need that.
Right. So basically, open source software is supported by a community, and there is at least one version of it that is free for use.
Okay. And
closed source is supported by a company, and you never get access to the code base itself. You get an encrypted version of the code.
Got it.
So you don't get to see what's going on under the hood.
Got it. Which, if you can't see it, obviously you can't tinkle with it.
Right. So if you can remember back in the day, and I'm going to go back, I'm not going back real far, but gateway computers.
I remember Gateway.
Gateway computers were a really good, affordable computer, but they would do stuff like solder the RAM into the RAM slot so you couldn't swap it out. Kind of like Apple versus
Android,
right? So there's not a whole lot of Android computers.
Well, not for computer based, but for phones. That was part of the reason why I switched over to Android.
Right, Android's open source, so you have a lot of different variations of Android out on the market, and Android software is not hardware specific. So I can put it on a lot of different kinds of hardware. Super nerdy, you can even put it on x86, which is more of like a computer stand, like a computer architecture, instead of an ARM architecture, which is your phone. I know I'm probably going way too deep into technology here, so I'm gonna reel it back.
Please,
please. But open source software is also, you can put it on any hardware that you want instead of being hardware specific, like Apple, right? So Apple Store software can only be put on Apple products. They can also kick people off their platforms, right? Whereas open source, it's harder to do that.
That's very interesting because. So when I was looking up this topic and I was looking at questions and trying to figure out which one would be the best question to ask and, talking to people about this.
Right.
My immediate thing went to the phone. because I was a hardcore Apple guy, right? When I first got Apple, I was like, this is so cool. Like, it was like the first, like, I don't want to say first, but one of the most popular smartphones.
Right.
When it came out, I got the second one, and I thought it was awesome.
Right.
But my brothers, they were hardcore Android.
Right.
And you know how that goes, right?
Yep.
So I was like, oh, man, you guys are not ready for Apple, and all this kind of stuff. They're like, no, you're not ready for Android. I'm like, what are you talking about? And so he asked me these questions. I'm like, well, I don't like this app. I don't like that app. But, whatever. It's an app. He's like, yeah, I just do I just get a different one. I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, that's an option?
Yes.
It blew my mind.
Yeah, so I think the phones are probably the most common thing that we're having today. And Android versus Apple is a great debate on the phones that we use. So if you remember, even there was a couple other closed source phone manufacturers that came out. Windows tried to come out with a smartphone, and they failed.
It didn't last very long.
Unfortunately, they failed because I truly believe that Windows 10 is the best desktop operating system that has ever been built.
It's pretty awesome, man.
I like it a lot. The only operating system for a desktop that I like that's similar or close to it is called Linux Mint, which is an open source desktop version of software. It's very user friendly. It's similar to Windows 10, but Windows 10 is just so powerful of a desktop operating system that it's hard to beat it. And they've really come down on their pricing. So it's affordable now for people to have a Windows 10 license. On the phone, and then Facebook came out with their own phone with the closed source, right? And it was a total flop. It didn't. Right. I don't even know how many people bought.
It didn't last. It didn't last very long.
Right.
They pulled it.
So Apple versus Android. The argument that I hear a lot is Apple just works, right? Everything just works, and I would make the same argument that if you buy a quality or a high-end Android phone, right? So like a Pixel 4, right? So I have a Pixel 4. I'm probably going to upgrade to the Pixel 5 here soon because it's got the 5G. But the big difference there is that, so I'm a comparable price to an Apple phone, right? But I'm all about personal accountability and personal choice. So if I'm going to spend the same amount as an Apple phone, I want to have the freedom to be in the beta group, to have first access to software, to be able to root my phone, to be able to install my own applications, to be able to use the dev kit to build my own applications. And I can do that with Android. I can't do that with Apple, which is a bummer to me. The other benefit that is without open source technology and without Android, I really don't think that we can support technology to a lot of the world, right? So closed source technology like Apple is not achievable. I don't know how many people, but I would say probably at least 30% of our planet, right? But an Android phone, I mean, we can get these down to like under $100 for a really, really nice, for not a really nice phone, but a solid working phone, right?
Phone that works.
I've never talked about that on this show, on this show. I have an autistic son. I have to buy phones and tablets every single month of my life.
Right?
Because he throws them.
Oh, he plays rough.
He plays hard, right? And he breaks stuff and things break, right? So I buy a TV or a tablet at least once a month in my life, right? And that's just
crazy, dude.
That's just the game. So having options of $79 tablets is huge for me, right? And then for him, this is his communication device, right? So software packages that are lower cost than the Apple device that he uses to talk are gigantic. It's a huge benefit for someone like me that I can buy these open source technologies that are built for lower cost hardware at a reasonable price. Right, and I'm not the one that doesn't have the money to go buy a new tablet, but I am one that has to buy them all the time. So, lower income families, all that stuff, they can now get technology
at a good price,
at a good rate because it's open source and people are driving that price down.
I never even considered that.
Yeah,
I literally switched over. The reason why I switched over from Apple to Android was because I was driving we're in St. Louis,
right,
and we drove to Florida with my brothers, all in the car. And I was using the GPS, I was a big brother. I thought I was doing my thing. And my GPS kept messing up. Right. It just was not working well at all. It kept rerouting. It kept losing power. I don't know if that was part of the cell phone company I was with or whatever. Right. But my brother's phone, he had an Android phone. And he was telling me how dude, he's like, I vetted out my GPS system. I'm like, what? I'm like, what do you mean? And it was awesome. It gave so many different like options for ways he can like block tollways and do. And Apple
Right.
at that time frame, Apple didn't have that.
Right.
And at that point, I was like, I'm done.
Yeah, so I mean, Google Maps
I'm
is
done.
really, really good. I just had an experience where it failed me, and I had to use a secondary map system. But that's the first time it's ever failed me. And
My
now I
wife has
have
an
another
Apple.
app that can help me do those things. But and
gonna
Google
keep that
should do
app?
that. No, it's $30 a month.
I was gonna say, man, I'm like, how many times are you driving a truck that can't fit through?
Maybe never again. Like I don't know. I'll probably never do it again. Right? So,
Apple Maps still failed me.
yeah.
Trying to go to Jimmy John's.
But if you're on
It
if
messes
you're on an
up.
Android, you have. I'm assuming that Waze is now on an Apple, and you can probably get Google Maps on an Apple device. I'm assuming.
I'm gonna check that. I'm gonna verify that
Yeah.
tonight when I go. When I go home.
But every app that goes into Apple has to be vetted by Apple, so therefore it doesn't have as many apps.
And that was part of the debate I had with a lot of people when I made this switch, right? Because
Right.
Apple came on strong.
Now the caveat is, Android's got a lot of shitty apps, right?
Right.
So you really have to pay attention and really research and do. So that comes with personal accountability, right? Is the responsibility of making sure that you're not installing viruses and stuff like that on your phone.
Right. So I want to give a little bit of background for our users here, our visitors today,
Right.
just to understand. Like, if you were curious about what the difference is and how it impacts your life, I guarantee you probably didn't even realize that was in your life because everyone either has an Apple phone or Android phone.
Yeah, I mean everybody uses open source at some point in their life.
Don't
They
even
know
realize
they're consumers of the end product that open source provided for them, right? I mean Google is on. I think Google uses Lightspeed as their web server. Is that right? Or Light HTTP? Yeah, so I think Google uses Light HTTP, and that's an
Okay.
open source software to serve you Google. So, I mean, if you just go to google.com, you're accessing open source technology, right?
And people didn't realize it. Most people
Most
probably
people
didn't.
don't even know it, right? And this is not. I mean, I'm a huge fan of open source technology, but I use Windows 10 as my desktop, which is closed source system. So I think there's room in the world of this giant world of abundance that we have. There's room for both open and source, and there's arguments to be made for almost everything that you're going to deploy, one way or the other, right?
Yeah. But option's the name of the game. Do you have that option or do you not? Right.
Right.
And if it works for you, great.
Absolutely.
But if it doesn't, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah, and I mean, there's an additional cost to open source technology, which is the knowledge that you need to be able to own it and operate it, right? And
Gotcha.
and manage it and have the servers and all those other things. But at the end of the day, I still think that open source technology is less expensive to own and operate than closed source technology. In most cases, in a lot of cases.
Okay.
In a lot of cases.
I had a question coming right for
Yeah.
that. So we actually answered Gary's question in
Okay.
that. So now I had a feeling we would. So we took care of Gary.
What was Gary's question, though?
It was, what exactly is open source software?
Okay, yeah, we're good.
So we dove deep into that.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers it in great detail, which actually kind of goes on to the next question. Because one thing I found when it comes to open source and closed source, it's always security. That comes up a lot. And it's really a common conversation. That was always the thing people always said with Apple, like, oh, well, you can't trust those Android users. You know who's building that app, right? You have no idea what's going on with there. So Rodney asked, how are open source software not vulnerable to security risks if all of it's publicly available?
It is subject to risk, right? And everything's subject to risk, but you have to do your own risk analysis whenever you're deploying software. And all risk analysis come down to probability and what's the other word? Likelihood and I'm looking for. I can't think of the word off the top of my head, but it's like really the impact, likelihood and impact, right? So if it's a high likelihood but a low impact, it's going to be a green in the risk. But if it's a high likelihood and a catastrophic impact, then that's a risk that you just can't accept, right?
There you go.
So I would say for vulnerabilities, probably the most popular open source software today in the world, I believe, is WordPress. And
Yes.
so the security around it is, one, there's a bunch of security tools built for WordPress. Two, the community around WordPress is enormous. Therefore, it's a giant target, right? So there's always 0-day exploits running, right? And 0-day is an exploit that somebody just found and they're using it right now. So, and it's before WordPress knows about it and can put a patch in place to prevent it. However, there are so many tools. What do we use, Ron, for our malware-free guarantee? Immunify. So we use a package called Immunify. It scans every single file as it's being put on the server. It looks for malware, looks for all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. On top of that, we're taking snapshots every day. We're backing up every day. We're taking those backups. We're putting them in a different city, right? Not even a different place, right? We're taking a snapshot. We're taking that snapshot. Gotcha. We're putting it in a different city. So
multiple layers of security.
Multiple layers. So you have we're doing the 1, 2, 3 on backup. So we have our production copy, we have our local backup copy, and we have our remote backup copy. On top of that, we scan every single file as it's being uploaded. So if we see something, we're going to get it. If an exploit does hit a WordPress website and gets there, then we can always go back to our backup, right? Mm-hmm. If it hits our local backup, then we can always go to our remote backup and then push that back out. So
that's awesome.
There's a lot of things that you can do for security to make sure that your stuff is secure and recoverable. Then it becomes down to two things that you want. And anytime you're talking about disaster recovery, you have two topics that you want to talk about. And I don't know the acronyms anymore because I don't deal with backups and recovery every single day. But you want to know how fast you want to be able to recover your data, and how old it was to recover from. So
interesting.
Those are the two variables when it comes to how much it's going to cost you to back your data up. How fast do I want to recover, and how long ago do I want to recover from? So if you want to recover within 4 hours and you're okay with midnight's data, which is the most common backup DR solution, then that's pretty easy to do. I back up every night. I put that off site. If my server completely crashes, catastrophic, I build a new server. It takes about 3 hours and about an hour to recover your data.
Okay.
A 4-hour retention with yesterday's data is pretty average, right? But if you have a site that you says, hey, I can't lose any data at all, ever, no data loss at all, not even a day, not even a minute, and you want it real time, then that's really expensive, right? It's a different model, right? You have to have every single write. Every time somebody writes anything to your data, you have to copy that in multiple locations. You have to have the facilities in multiple places to spin it up quickly and stuff like that. But
man, that gets complicated fast.
We're now in a disaster recovery conversation instead of a open source conversation. So there are a lot of things you can do to secure your open source software. And whenever you're choosing open source software, for me, I always look for large communities behind my open source software.
Why is that?
Because the more people in the game, the more everybody has to lose, the faster we'll come up with a solution, and we all get to come up with a solution together, potentially, right?
For the people, by the people.
Right. So I can deploy my own solution. I can communicate that out to the forums and to the boards and to the community. Other people can take it and use it too. And then some people might have better ideas than I do. And then generally there's a governing body over the open source software that has been voted in or something, right? And they get to make those decisions on what software or what upgrades go into the software. So that I don't think it's any more of a risk on security than a closed source application, right? Because
same things you got to deal with.
I mean, any hacker can get the software and put it on a local machine and try to hack it. And once they find an exploit, then they can deploy that worldwide pretty quickly. So,
well, that was going to be my follow-up question. Actually, was if it's open source, it's available to the public, anyone can get in. How do you stop hackers and bots from getting in and just creating havoc?
So I mean, you don't get source code from anywhere but the authorized source, right? So if
interesting,
you don't download.
Do people really do that? That's a really pretty common thing.
I don't know if it's a common thing. I mean, if they could get it, they would have to get into the definitive source code, right? to deploy something like that. So
I mean, I downloaded an email one time. You were like, "No, dude, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, my bad."
Right. So I think it's just common sense, looking out, treading lightly. Step on the ice before you push down a little bit before you commit and walk all the way out into the icy pond. I think that's just what you do in technology as a whole. I think the risk of a closed source software being exploited versus an open source is the same. I can buy a copy of your closed source software, put it in my dev environment, and try to hack it all day long. Right? And as soon as I find an exploit for it, then I can deploy that worldwide. If I don't find an exploit, then I move on to the next piece.
Keep
right?
hacking and keep doing your thing.
Yeah. I guess the difference is that free software is free, so it doesn't cost them anything to download it and try to exploit it.
So anyone could, potentially.
Yeah.
Right? Anyone could have, because anyone can have access to it. So.
Right. I mean, it's mostly what we call script kids. Right? It's kids that find scripts of known exploits and try to... So we'll use WordPress again, for example. If you don't update your WordPress website right now. If you don't do it, log in right now and get it updated.
Yeah.
If you're 3 or 4 versions old, there's known exploits to those older versions. If a security update comes out, it's the exploit in the previous version is a known exploit, right? Hey, we updated the software because we found this exploit potential. So we updated it. So now the older versions have known published exploits. So keep your stuff updated. If you're not updating and you're getting hacked, it's because you're not updating your stuff.
Wow, I had no idea that that's probably pretty common in open source.
So that's why I'm so fanatical about updating WordPress. I'm like, no, you have to always be updated. No, we won't let people on our servers that don't keep their websites updated because they're going to get hacked. And then if they get hacked, then they're probably going to blame the hosting provider. Well, the real reason is you didn't update your site.
You didn't do your maintenance.
You didn't do your maintenance, right? You need to update your websites. You need to update your software packages. And it's as important on open source as it is closed source, right? So if you don't run your Windows updates, and Windows has security, critical, and just regular updates or software updates, I think, are the 3 categories. If you don't do your security updates, you're going to get hacked because the security updates are published exploits.
So they know.
Right. So then what happens is these kids in Russia and China, they start, maybe not even kids, I don't know. I call them kids, but I call everybody kids now.
All hackers are kids, right?
Yeah. They take those known exploits and they write scripts against them, and then they just deploy that and try to hit every possible IP on the planet.
Man.
Right? So,
that's crazy.
I mean, if you take today, I would bet if I took a Linux server and put it on a network, or a Windows server and put an old version of Windows, and I put it on the network, I think it's less than 5 minutes before we get an attack attempt. 30 seconds. We put a brand new, we put a brand new unpatched server on the network, we start seeing scans in 30 seconds to a minute of people trying to exploit that box.
That is crazy.
Right? So if you're in the world, you just keep your shit up to date, man. You don't even play the game of, oh, I can't do that. And if you can't, then you get it off the public network. There are some applications in the world that are so old, written in such weird software that are closed source that do very specific things that software hasn't been updated for them yet. So I've got a great argument for open source versus closed source. I have a friend that owns a steel company, right?
Okay.
And he's using a piece of software on an old IBM mainframe. Okay. And it was written in a software language called Cobalt, and it's closed source. He doesn't have access to the source. And this specific piece of software tracks his steel freight from China to the U.S. So he can track where his steel is throughout the entire shipping process. And he's trying to and he has to maintain an IBM mainframe and maintain these now 60-year-old women that are the only people that are trained on this software, right? And he can't find a replacement because nobody manufactures the software anymore. And he can't find a replacement for it. So
why can't he find another software that can do that?
I don't know why he can't, but and he's not willing to pay me to find out. So, or to do the research to find a replacement.
Resources, that's the reason.
Yeah. So, he's kind of stuck. If that was open source, we have a software package that we use that was open source, and we were using a closed source payment gateway, and the closed source payment gateway stopped working with our open source software. But because it was open source software, we were able to go to authorize.net, get a new authorize.net account, and then rewrite our software to work with authorize.net. So we had the ability to take old software,
update it,
and update it ourselves to work with a new technology.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's, to me, that would be the power of being able to make those changes and getting in and seeing the source and being able to make those changes yourself if you're competent enough to do it, or if you're smart enough to hire people that are competent. Which is all I am. I'm just smart enough to hire competent people.
Hey, you don't even have to be that smart. But I don't know how to do this. Let me find someone that does.
Yeah. But you have that option. If you were in a closed source world,
you're dead in the water.
You just got to find a whole new software package to handle all of those needs.
Man, that is crazy.
Yeah.
That is crazy. Wow. So, Rodney, I guess we answered your question.
I don't know what question we answered.
The question was, how are open source software not vulnerable to security risk if all of it's publicly available?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it is vulnerable, but it's no more vulnerable than closed source software.
So what it comes down to really is like, what is your risk tolerance? And if you have a low risk tolerance, you should probably go to a closed source. You don't have to even.
Well, if you have a low risk tolerance, then you need to manage it with firewalls. You need to manage it with software patches and updates.
Oh, we got to do that regardless what side you're on.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
Interesting.
But if you're doing all those things, open source, there's really no bigger risk to open source software than closed on the security side in reality that I know of.
So now it actually brings up another follow-up question for me now. Because I got a feeling, again, I'm not alone. Because this is definitely going towards a world that I'm not too versed in.
Right.
What are the pros and cons of both? Because I feel like in a nutshell, right? Because I feel like we kind of talked about a lot of pros, right? But the only con I really see is the security part. But if that's on both sides,
well, so the con is, so the pro for open source is the initial investment. That's a huge pro. The con is that you have to have the technical chops to be able to deploy it. Right now, everything's a lot easier today for technology. It's a lot easier to install software. When I was younger, I had to compile my own software, even if it was open source. So I had to do make, install, compile, all this stuff. Right? It was much more challenging. On like a Windows box, you have a .exe file that you just double click and it does all this stuff for you. And next.
Right.
Well, on Linux, which is an open source operating system, there used to not be an installer, so you had to compile your own software.
Oh,
wow. And then they came out with the one that I like the most is called Yum, but there's also apt-get, and there's a couple others now too, right? RPM. Red Hat came out with RPM a long time ago, so that was probably the first Linux installer package manager.
Interesting.
Yeah, so originally Linux didn't have package managers, so if you had to install software, you had to do it by hand, like literally compile it.
Oh man, that's intense.
It was fairly intense, and complicated software packages like Apache, you had to compile it. When you compiled it, you had to tell it exactly what you wanted to do and deploy it. So it was a big learning curve. You had to have
right.
You had to have the right staff to be able to deploy that software. Today, at Hostirian, we have a one-click installer for 400 different software packages, I think. So it's super easy to install the open source software today with Yum, and we have a software package called Softalicious or Softaculous? Softaculous that installs and configures these open source software packages on the server for you.
See, and that was I was thinking. One of the things that's like a pro, I guess, for open source software is that even if you don't know how to do it yourself, someone else probably has figured it out already. Because there's so many people in this big community, right?
There's a couple like if you're running an open source software package that's written in PHP and MariaDB, you're going to find a lot of people that know how to do that. Like
Right.
PHP programmers and MariaDB programmers
Been doing it for
or
years.
admins are readily available. They're really affordable. When you start getting into more specialized stuff, and again, this is going to be a little nerdy, like Ruby or Go, then you have less of a resource in the world to hire people for, because it's more specific. It's not really more niche, but it's not as widely used as PHP and MariaDB.
So then, what would be the pro and con for? I'm sorry, I'm way away from my mic. What would be the pro and con for closed soft then? For closed.
So closed is going to be, and not all the time, because it's a capitalist world. Pros are going to compete, or closed source software is going to compete with its competitors. So Microsoft's competing with Apple.
Mm-hmm.
So the two are pushing for better all the time, right? Because if Apple gets far superior than Microsoft, well, Microsoft's going to go out of business, and vice
Right.
versa. So they continue to push the quality way high, right? I mean, nobody's going to argue with the quality of a Macintosh desktop or a Windows 10 desktop, right? They're both high quality, best of breed software packages. So, I mean, that's a huge pro for that kind of software. When you go to MariaDB, which is a database package, to Oracle DB, Oracle database is wildly expensive. And the difference there is a Maria database can do multiple millions of rows of data, and Oracle is probably billions of rows of data, right? So, but until you're like over 100 million rows of data, you don't really need to go to Oracle. You can stay on MariaDB. And then even then, there's ways to do it with MariaDB, but it won't be this one-stop shop. I think the biggest pro to closed source software is that you don't get fired by going with Microsoft. Right? You don't get fired by going to AWS. Gotcha. So whenever you're making the decision, and in bigger corporations, you have to vet, okay, could I use this for less money? Yes, but will it cost the company more long term? It might in some cases.
To like fix, repair, update.
Right, because if you buy an Oracle database, you have to have an Oracle DBA, but you have Oracle support behind it. If you use MariaDB, you have a MariaDB admin, but there's nobody to call. Like you go to the community,
that could be a problem,
and put it in. But now I think you could. There are third parties that support those software packages if you need support. So it's really, if you want to use open source, there's a lot of open source software packages that you can use that are affordable or that are free to use. You have to have a server and stuff that are pretty well refined and have great community support. But if you're doing something really complex and you don't have any technical ability, you don't have any technical staff, then you can buy the closed source, and that generally comes with some kind of support package.
Gotcha.
Right? Now, they have to stay in business, so that support's like 2 years. Then you got to buy the upgraded software package, right? So a closed source package that we use all the time is Camtasia.
There you go.
Right? We use Camtasia to edit videos on a regular basis, and it's a closed source software. But it's a pretty easy software to use, so we're okay paying for the licensing. And we don't use it for this podcast. What software do you use for this podcast? OBS, Open Broadcast System, right? It's an open source software, and it's what Ron uses to switch cameras back and forth.
So it kind of comes down to me what I'm getting, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? Because I'm still kind of green in this area. It just really depends on what do you really need this software to do. That's going to determine if closed source is a better option or open source is a better option.
Yeah, for us it generally comes down to budget. So OBS, Open Broadcast System, is free. We put it on a $1,000 tablet or laptop. So we have $1,000 invested into our live switching capability. To buy a video toaster or some kind of video editing suite, probably $5,000 on the low side. right?
That's the low side.
That's the low side, I think, for video editing software, right? When I was an intern, now this goes back a long time ago when I was in college, I worked, my internship was at the Kiel Center, which you know today as, I think, the Edward Jones Dome?
No, not Savvis.
Was the Savvis Center. So it was the Kiel Center, then it was the Savvis Center, Edward Jones, now it's the Enterprise Center. And I worked for the Jumbotrons, and I was the...
I forgot about the Kiel, man.
Was my internship, and we had a software package called Media 100. We had a whopping 23 gigs of storage, and I think it was a Macintosh software package, and we spent $80,000 on it.
Oh my God, dude, that's crazy.
So, and it did, a fraction of what OBS does
with 23 gigs of data. Like
23 gigs of storage, man.
Oh, man.
That was big time. That was big time in 90. When was my internship? I graduated in 96, so my internship would have been 96.
Oh, man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. So it kind of leads into our next question here because I lost my spot. Eric.
Okay.
Eric asked, is free open source software communist?
I mean, it has some communist thoughts behind it, right? 'Cause it's free for everyone. I mean, I don't think it's communist, really, but I would say it has a giant social aspect to it, right?
Correct.
And it's for the community. I mean, I think calling it communist would be pretty a hard line to draw. Interesting concept, though, right? But there's no dictator. Right?
No one's. I mean, the community's dictating. Besides the governing body for that open source.
Right.
software.
I would call open source software decentralized before I would call it communist. Maybe I have not the proper understanding of communism. I think communism has a dictator, and I don't know that that's necessarily true.
They have to have some kind of leader.
Yeah. Open source software definitely has a hippie vibe. Right, it's like a damn demand. I'm gonna make my own software kind of vibe, right?
Okay.
And it has a little bit of ego attached to it. Like, oh, I can write it better. Like, I can make that software better than the other guy.
I thought that breeds competition, though, man.
It does, yeah. I mean, it does. But then there's the aspects of blockchain. Bitcoin is an open source technology, right? So
there you go.
And that's a little, less communist and more government destroying kind of technology.
It goes against the government. Well, it's the dollar.
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin could definitely destroy governments, right? Absolutely. It has, there's been several governments that have considered making Bitcoin their national currency.
I did not know that.
Yeah, because it's more stable than theirs.
Which is crazy to think about that. And I guess
they call Bitcoin stable is
that's what I'm saying.
That in itself is a crazy
joke,
crazy concept, right?
There's nothing about that seems stable to me.
Yes.
But I think that's a super strong, statement for open source software that it has the ability to be that kind of powerful, that had that kind of power that countries and governments are saying, hey, we need to jump on board with this.
And to be clear, Bitcoin is not open source, but blockchain is. Is that correct, Ron? Yeah.
Oh. Well,
so Bitcoins itself are not, but the blockchain, you can go and download blockchain source code, modify it, and launch your own coins tomorrow.
Gotcha.
Your own cryptocurrency tomorrow.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't have a question about this, but it's a question I couldn't find anything, kind of diving deep in after, talking to a lot of people about it. But are you familiar with what, if you were to, make it a update, right, to some software, how does that work when it comes to the licensing? Because all it basically means that if you want to update and create your own, you just give it away. Or can you sell it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. So can you sell it? No, you cannot sell the software, but you can sell support for the software, and you can sell the software as a service. So I can't sell you WordPress, but I can sell you a WordPress website.
Gotcha.
Right? But I can't sell you WordPress because I don't own WordPress.
Okay.
But I can install WordPress on my server and then sell you access to it, right, all day long. If I want to, so what a person should do or a company should do, if they're utilizing an open source piece of software and they're utilizing it regularly and they need to make a change for some of their own purposes, right? We haven't done it a lot, but we've made some recommendations for changes to some software. I can't think of what they are off the top of my head. Modules Garden? Okay.
We should have had Ron a guest on this show today.
Yeah, really. I mean, Ron does a lot of open source software too. So, and if you come across something and you say, hey, this is a real need for this piece of software,
Right.
and I have the staff to write that, they can write that piece of code and then submit it back to the board of directors for that piece of software. I think my best example of that would be OpenStack, NASA, and Rackspace. So OpenStack is a open source piece of software to manage and deploy public clouds. And NASA uses it a lot, and Rackspace uses it a lot. So they got together, and NASA and Rackspace are the two largest contributors to OpenStack.
So they're constantly bringing up new updates and.
So now you've got two phenomenal teams in our country,
Right.
Rackspace and
NASA.
And Rackspace is a competitor, so we're definitely not affiliated, right? But Rackspace and Netscape and NASA are both working on the OpenStack project together and making contributions to it.
Man,
so
that's intense right there.
Yeah, and that's the power, right? So part of the power of open source is you can have these two teams that otherwise would not work together.
Now they
right?
have a reason to collab.
Now they have a reason to collaborate, and we're getting the best of what Rackspace needs are as a cloud provider and NASA's needs as a cloud user.
That's really cool.
Right? And
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and you end up with OpenStack, which is wildly powerful piece of software.
Interesting.
That most people in the world will never use, or they might use it, but they won't ever know that they're using it. Right? It's behind the scene kind of stuff. Yeah.
I mean, because like I said, I didn't realize what open and closed source was until it came down to my phone. So it had to directly impact me.
Right.
Right. And in a negative way. If my GPS worked fine, I'm like, whatever, dude.
Right.
Right. I didn't have a need for it.
Right.
Which brings to the next question here by Max, and this will probably be our last question. But Max asked.
This went by fast.
It did. It really did. I mean, I had a lot of personal questions too, just like kind of talking about it and research and trying to like.
So before we get to the last question, if you've liked the video so far and you've gained any kind of benefit from it, smash that like, hit the subscribe. If you're listening to us on Spotify, subscribe to the channel. If you want to ask me any questions, talk about anything at all, about technology, business, home life, whatever, I don't care. Feel free to send me a text message at 314-370-2871. That's my personal text message number. Be part of my community. I'll send you cool little text messages and stuff here and there. And I'm also there to answer any questions, comments, concerns that you might have.
Great call. Great segue to that. Great segue. So this question here with Max. He asked, "What is the benefit of open sourcing your software and then providing cloud hosting as opposed to a typical software as a service model?"
So I think that's multiple questions.
Yes.
So we'll back up and just answer the first one first.
Okay.
What's the benefit of opening the source to my software package?
What's the benefit of open sourcing your software?
Yeah. So the benefit is if I have a great idea and I can't afford a big team, but I want the solution for me or for the world, I can take the base set of code, I can open it up to the world and say, hey, this is free to use, but if you use it and you make updates to it, please send them back to the community, right? So you can have
that's kind of cool,
hundreds or thousands of people working on your software idea, and they're doing it for free just for the rights to use your software.
That's so cool to me.
Right? So the power in the group, right? You could almost look like open source as the first crowdfunding, but it was crowdfunding for labor, right?
Got it.
And it was so you could get, really cool pieces of software made for very little money.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about stuff like web servers, so now you got, the 5 biggest companies in the world need web servers, so they start writing Apache, right? And now
they're
Apache's
use the hell out of it.
Right, and I need it and you need it. So why are we paying a third party when we both have the skill sets and the teams to write this code
That is awesome.
and keep adding it to the team? So why would we pay for software when we just pay for the labor to make the software? Right?
Think outside the bun.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's the why would I open source my software? That would be the reason why.
It's for the power and the resources of a community versus one.
Right. So if I was going to start a software today, I would either, I'd hire somebody from Upwork to start it and take it out of my pocket, or I'd go to raise money, try to raise the capital to build the software myself. I would try all those things. And, a lot of software probably wouldn't get written. Right. But if there's a need for the software and the software solves a problem, then it's going to get written.
Right.
And if it solves a problem for a lot of people and a lot of highly technical people, then it will get written fast.
I mean, that kind of sounds like every last one of the plugins on WordPress.
Right,
You know
right. And so WordPress plugins is a great example, and Android Marketplace is another example of, I can write that better, right?
Yeah.
And they do, right? So you have choices now. You can really install 2 different plugins and look at them and say, I like these features from this one and these features
Right.
from this one, and deploy the one that you like better.
So American.
Right.
I want
Yes.
options. I want choices. You don't tell me what I get to do. Let me figure it out for myself.
And because, WordPress is open source, I can charge for those plugins, or I can write them for free. What most people are doing is they're writing, a free version, and that goes into
Get you in.
Get you in, and it has some features, but then you got to pay for additional features, right? So,
Right.
But I don't think all open source software is free, but not all free software is open source.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes free software is not open source. It's just, it's to get you in the door.
Gotcha.
That's a loss
Gotcha.
leader, right?
So, to continue to the second half of Max's question is
Right.
then providing a cloud host, and then providing cloud hosting, as opposed to the typical software as a service model. So the first part of the question was, what is the benefit of open sourcing your software,
Right.
and then providing a cloud hosting opposed to the typical software as a service?
I don't know that I understand that question totally.
Okay, I'm gonna have to reach out to Max and kind of get some clarification.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think what he's saying, would I sell that software to the end user directly in a container, or would I have a software as a service where they come to my website, sign up, and use my software from my website? Would be like a software as a service kind of approach, or would I sell it directly to the end user? I think there's benefits to both. Having a multi-tenant software as a service software package is wildly powerful, because then you have one source of data that you have to update. Whereas if you sell your software to the end user and you've got 100 people using your software on 100 different computers, then
You need a support team.
Then you need a support team, right? Because it might not work with this printer driver, or this video driver might conflict with it. And then when you deploy an update, you're going to have, if you only do one update, then you're going to have 2 groups of people that have updated, people that haven't updated. And when you're at 10 updates, you're going to have
That's a
10
problem.
different variations. You're going to be supporting people that have not updated at all, people that updated to 1, people that updated 2, and people that updated 3, all the way through the whole cycle.
That makes support a nightmare.
It's software as a service model where you're doing a multi-tenant environment where everybody's logging into the same software, but they're containerized by their user account,
Right.
is by far the most scalable way to sell your software, because you have one set of source code that you have to keep updated and keep supported, and everybody's always using the same exact version because you control that. Whereas if you deploy it out on multiple desktops, then everybody's in a different place in their journey.
So that's probably why the typical software service model is typical,
Yes.
because you can scale it.
It's way more scalable. It is more challenging to sell your software that way up front, because you have to make sure that you have session IDs created properly. You need to make sure that you're containerizing your users from seeing other users' data, things like that. But if once you figure that out, then it's extremely more scalable.
Got it. Okay.
So,
All right. Well, there's our time today. Before we end, I would love to kind of end it on an action step, right? Like, what should someone do if they're thinking about going into open source software or opening their software up, or
Right.
where they should start at?
So if you're going to open your own open source, I would say my first step would be get a Git server, and that's Git. Git. Get a Git server and start playing around with how to version your software and really understand how versioning and deploying software packages to end users goes. And understand that.
Model
that would be
Apple.
for the. I would say that'd be for the wildly advanced user. If you just want to play with open source software, WordPress is a great place to start. You can buy hosting for as low as $5-6 a month from all over the country, including Hostirian, and get WordPress and start playing around with it, right? And what I tell everybody on our staff is when they start, is, hey, you should probably have your own website. And I would recommend WordPress just because it's nice and it's wildly supportable. But if you can use Joomla or a bunch of different ones, and I would say take your favorite hobby and build a website around that hobby, right? And then hopefully you can even turn that into revenue generator at some point, right? So take your favorite hobby. What would you like to see out of a website or a community website around that hobby? Even if it's your favorite TV show, right? Who cares? And build a website using WordPress around that and get an idea of what that is. And then really just read, okay, I want my website to have this feature, and then just look up that feature on Google and say, how do I do this in WordPress? Read, you'll come across 4 or 5 different articles on almost everything.
Yeah.
Choose what path you want to take, what seems like the most reliable source of information,
Mm-hmm.
and if it's on the WordPress, you can read stars, ratings, and all those things, right? So, and then try to and deploy it and see what happens.
That's what I love about WordPress. Like, I literally, when I got to that point where I realized that all I had to do was just find the plugin,
Yeah.
at that point, WordPress became Mr. Potato Head to me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna find a different arm, a different leg, different
Yep.
lips, different
Absolutely.
eyes. Like, I'm gonna build whatever I want, right?
Yes.
So
get creative, get imaginative. If you, and I would challenge you, if you have a business need, to look at open source software first.
there you go.
And if you have a business need, feel free to give us a call, right? And we probably have an open source solution that can solve your problem. Almost always.
Right, because I think one of the biggest benefits to take away from open source software is that it's a lot more affordable in most cases.
Especially out of the capital expense up front is almost always more affordable.
Right.
There's arguments that can be made long term if it costs more to operate long term than closed source. Yes. There are arguments to that. I've never seen closed source be more expensive or open source be more expensive than closed source.
There you go.
I've just never seen it. But I've also always had a staff and myself that are somewhat knowledgeable in how to manage those things. So
That also helps.
it does. It does. If you have no IT staff, then hire someone to do it for you.
Yes.
Or use closed source so you have the thing. But if you're okay with hiring someone to do it, and generally that labor is pretty affordable,
Go for it.
then I would.
Awesome sauce.
Yes.
That's our time here today. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you don't forget to rate us. Give us that 5 stars. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you catch the next episode that we have. If you have questions about that you want us to answer or topics that you want us to talk about, message us. You can text me at 314-216-2040. You can also email, but I mean, I feel like I put it out there, but I get more text messages than anything.
Yeah.
So use the text line. Right?
Just throw our email addresses up here. My text number is 314-370-2871. They'll throw our email addresses up here. We'll put it in the comments as well, so you can email us. The email addresses are kind of long and stuffy, so
It's just it's very inefficient.
fantastic.
So
Get to work.
and make it count, y'all.
Fade black.